The moment my husband screamed, "Get out, go to your family," my heart froze. I stood in the doorway in nothing but my nightgown, the cold wind biting my skin, and behind me, the neighbor watched with an unreadable expression. Weeks of whispers, plotting, and betrayal had led to this. I felt powerless, humiliated, and furious. But deep down, a fire ignited a fire that whispered, "This is not the end. I would make them pay." And I knew exactly how. What happened next would change everything. My family, my life, and them. And they would never see it coming. My name is Elaine Carter, and I am 38 years old. I have spent most of my life working hard, raising my son alone, and trying to keep a home that felt safe, even when the world was anything but. I am a single mother, dedicated, loyal, and the kind of woman who believes in fairness. I believed I earned respect, yet I was constantly underestimated, dismissed, and quietly ignored. Tonight, all of that changed in a single moment, a single sentence that cut deeper than any insult I had endured before. He said it clearly, without hesitation. "Get out. Go to your family." My husband, the man I had trusted for years, the man I had shared laughter and tears with, was standing in the living room, his voice sharp, venomous. I froze in the doorway, nightgown clinging to my skin, the cold air brushing against my arms. My heart was hammering in my chest. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold onto the doorknob. I had never felt so small, so exposed, so utterly humiliated. My son watched from the corner of the room, his wide eyes reflecting confusion, fear, and a silent anger that I had never seen before. I could feel my chest tighten as I struggled to keep my voice steady, to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. Every word he had spoken was a blade, each one twisting the knife further. I had built this house with my sweat, my time, my sacrifices, and now I was being cast out like a stranger. The neighbor was watching. I noticed her from the corner of my eye, leaning slightly against her doorway, expression unreadable. Her smirk made my skin crawl. She had always been polite, helpful, friendly even, but there was something in her gaze that tonight felt dangerous, knowing I could not tell if she was merely an observer or if she had something to do with the storm that had just hit my life. The thought alone made my stomach twist. Was this her doing? Or was she simply enjoying the spectacle of my humiliation? I took a step forward, only to stumble slightly as my knees weakened under the weight of disbelief. The cold air of the suburban evening pierced me, making every nerve in my body jump. Streetlights flickered above, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. Leaves skittered along the asphalt, whipped by a sudden gust of wind, as though nature itself was mocking me. My pulse was deafening in my ears, my chest rising and falling rapidly. And yet, through the chaos of my fear, a tiny ember of something else began to burn. Anger, defiance, a sense that I would not be erased, not tonight. I looked at my son, who was hesitating behind me, unsure whether to step forward or remain in the house. I wanted to hold him, shield him, make him feel safe, yet even that act felt impossible. My husband's betrayal had not just wounded Mitt, had fractured our little family, cast a shadow over the life I had worked so hard to protect. I could not understand how a person could treat someone they claimed to love with such cruelty, such calculated disregard. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the injustice, trying to find some flicker of logic in his actions. Every step I took down the driveway felt heavier than the last. I could feel the judgment in the air, the imagined whispers of neighbors behind drawn curtains. My mind reeled with questions I did not yet have the answers to. Was this the beginning of something permanent, or was it merely a prelude to deeper humiliation? The neighbor's eyes followed me, unblinking, her smirk widening just slightly. It was a silent dare, a reminder that someone was watching, that my suffering might not be mine alone. I drew a shaky breath, feeling the cold wind fill my lungs. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand some explanation, but my body refused to obey. My legs were unsteady, my hands still trembling, cold sweat beading along my temples. I felt naked, exposed not only in body, but in spirit. And yet, as I reached the edge of the sidewalk, my son gently pressed his hand against mine, grounding me in a way that made my blood run hotter, not colder. I realized then that humiliation was not the end of the story. It was merely the spark that would ignite what was coming next. I did not know what the future held. I only knew that I was not finished, that I was still present, still thinking, still planning. Behind me, the neighbor's smirk lingered in the shadows as if daring me to act, to reclaim what had been stolen. I would not allow this night to define me. Something was coming, something they could not anticipate. And when it arrived, they would finally understand that underestimation carries a price. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, share your own most satisfying revenge story in the comments, and subscribe for more real-life tales of justice, courage, and triumph. Remember, power is not given, is earned. The next few days were unbearable. Every time I walked into my own house, it felt like stepping into a battlefield I had not chosen. My husband moved through the rooms with calculated ease, as if nothing had happened, as if I had simply vanished from his life. He spoke to me with clipped politeness, yet every word dripped with condescension. He would hand me a cup of coffee only to remark on how I spilled it too often, as if my trembling hands were a joke rather than a symptom of the anxiety he had caused. My son avoided him lingering in his room or staying close to me in the kitchen. His small presence, a quiet rebellion against the tension that filled every corner of the house. I could see the fear in his eyes, but also a growing anger that mirrored my own. Every glance we exchanged was loaded with unspoken words, warnings, and questions that neither of us dared speak aloud. The neighbor appeared more often, always at the right moment, leaning over her fence with a casual smile that felt anything but innocent. She asked about my day in a tone that suggested she already knew everything. And every question, every pause, seemed to cut deeper than my husband's words. I began to notice the pattern, the timing, the way her presence coincided with his cruelty. It was not mere coincidence. She was watching, waiting, perhaps even nudging him along. My stomach churned at the thought, but I forced myself to remain outwardly calm, though inside a storm was gathering. One evening, he cornered me in the living room, voice low and sharp. "You cannot do anything right," he said, pacing behind me. "Even your son is embarrassed by your mistakes." His words hit like stones, relentless and cold. I could feel the blood drain from my face, my hands clutching the edge of the sofa for support. The air felt heavier, thick with tension and malice. I wanted to respond, to scream, to strike back, but every instinct told me to wait, to observe, to survive. The humiliation did not stop there. During a small dinner party, he made a point of telling our friends about my supposed incompetence. The way I managed bills, the way I had handled our son's schooling. His voice was smooth, confident, rehearsed, like a performer who knew exactly which words would wound the deepest. I smiled politely, forcing myself to nod while my heart raced and my cheeks burned. The neighbors whispered behind their hands, exchanging glances I could feel like knives in my chest. The smirk I had seen on the other neighbor's face that night on the street now seemed permanent, a silent accomplice enjoying my suffering. I began noticing small betrayals everywhere. Letters from the bank left open on the counter, appointments changed without my knowledge, items misplaced and blamed on my carelessness. It was relentless, a campaign of control and degradation that chipped away at my confidence piece by piece. My body ached constantly, a tight knot of stress in my shoulders, headaches that refused to relent, and nights filled with dreams of being trapped in a room with no doors. At work, I tried to carry on as normal, but I could feel the change in my demeanor. I was sharper, quieter, cautious with every word, aware that anyone could sense the storm I was living in at home. And yet, it only fueled the fire inside me. I realized I was not just a victim. I was a target, underestimated and disrespected. That realization did not bring peace. It brought clarity. Each encounter with my husband became a battle of wills. He would smile, but the eyes told a different story. Moldering contempt, the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Every command, every criticism was a calculated reminder of his power. And yet, the more he tried to diminish me, the stronger my resolve became. I began to notice the patterns, the rhythms of his cruelty, and the small openings he left that could be exploited. Late one night, I overheard him speaking to the neighbor in hushed tones, laughter echoing through the thin walls of the house. Their words were indistinct, but the tone carried condescension, scheming, and complicity. My pulse quickened. They were working together, orchestrating a campaign against me, assuming I would crumble quietly. They did not know that I had already started watching, recording, memorizing every detail, every slip, every insult. I could feel the ember of anger that had begun when he first threw me out grow into a flame. It wrapped around my thoughts, warm and consuming, giving clarity and focus to every action I would take. I realized that survival alone was no longer enough. I needed more. I needed justice, visibility, acknowledgement, and finally a reckoning they would never forget. And yet, even in that growing determination, doubt crept in. Could I truly turn the tide against someone so cunning, so cruel? The house felt smaller with every passing day, the walls closer, the shadows darker. Every glance at my son reminded me that I had to be stronger, smarter, faster. I could not afford mistakes, and I could not allow fear to paralyze me. The stage was set, though neither of them realized it. Their confidence and their control blinded them to the fact that I had begun to plot, to prepare, and to observe. Their arrogance was my advantage. And in the quiet moments when the house was still, when only the ticking of the clock marked the passage of time, I smiled to myself. They had no idea what was coming. Not yet, but soon they would learn that cruelty has consequences, and underestimation is a fatal error. I remember the moment it broke me completely. I was standing in the kitchen washing a dish that did not need washing, just to avoid his voice. My husband leaned against the counter, smirking, as if he owned the air I breathed. "You are useless," he said quietly, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but loud enough for my entire body to tremble. Every nerve in my body tightened. My hands gripped the porcelain so hard that cracks appeared in my knuckles. My chest heaved, lungs burning with the weight of disbelief and rage. My son sat at the table, silently drawing in his notebook. I could see the tension in his small shoulders, the way he clenched his pencil until the tip broke. He looked up at me, eyes wide, and I could see the same frustration, the same helplessness that I felt mirrored in him. And in that moment, the last shred of patience I had left slipped away. I was tired of walking on eggshells. I was tired of pretending that his words, his smirks, his deliberate cruelty did not hurt me. I slammed the dish down, water splashing over the edge of the sink, and turned to face him fully. My voice was low, steady, but trembling. "Do not forget," I said, "that underestimating someone like me comes with consequences." His smirk faltered, the faintest flicker of surprise crossing his face, and for a moment I allowed myself a small, private victory. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I could feel the tension radiating from every corner, from the walls that had witnessed years of my compromise, my sacrifices, my quiet endurance. The weight of it pressed down on me, making my head spin and my vision blur. I felt a surge of anger mixed with clarity, a strange, dangerous combination that sharpened my senses and focused my thoughts. I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I paced in the small space, every step echoing against the hardwood floors. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was becoming sharper, more methodical. I could no longer ignore the truth. He had underestimated me for too long. He had treated me like I was weak, expendable, a placeholder in his life until something better came along. And now, after this latest insult, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. I would not let this continue, not quietly, not ever. I sat down at the desk in the corner of the room and began thinking through every detail of what had happened. Every insult, every manipulation, every smirk from the neighbor. I made a mental list of everything they had done to humiliate me. Everything they assumed I would forget or forgive. The list was long, and as I went over it, a pulse of clarity coursed through me. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to reclaim my dignity, I had to act carefully, strategically, without hesitation. The ember of revenge that had been flickering inside me for weeks began to grow into a steady flame. I began imagining scenarios, small at first, ways to expose the hypocrisy, to catch him off guard, to make him feel even a fraction of the fear and helplessness he had caused me. Each scenario became more daring, more precise, more satisfying in my mind. And with each thought, the sense of empowerment grew. For the first time in months, I felt in control, not of him, but of myself. And that control was intoxicating. I thought about the neighbor again, that quiet, knowing smirk that had followed me through the last few weeks. She was not just a witness. She was a part of the equation. Perhaps she had whispered into his ear. Perhaps she had encouraged his cruelty. That made her a target too, but it also made her predictable. People who think they are clever always leave traces, and I intended to follow them until I understood exactly how to strike. I leaned back in my chair, hands clasped together, and allowed a small smile to creep onto my face. This was no longer about fear or humiliation or despair. This was about strategy. This was about patience. Every insult, every sneer, every manipulation they had thrown at me had built a roadmap for their undoing. I had the advantage they did not. See, I had time, focus, and clarity. They had arrogance and overconfidence, and those were their weaknesses. I looked at the clock. Night had fallen completely, the wind rattling the windows, the world outside dark and silent. I thought about my son sleeping peacefully in his room, unaware of the storm building just outside the door. I wanted to protect him, to ensure he never felt powerless again. That thought anchored me, gave me resolve. Whatever I was about to do, it had to be flawless. It had to be undeniable. I closed my eyes and let the images form in my mind, the moments when they assumed they had defeated me, the moments when they laughed, the moments they thought I would break. And I imagined them all reversed, every insult returned, every smirk erased. A sense of calm settled over me, steady and cold, like a weapon in my hands. I would not act recklessly. I would wait. I would watch. I would plan. And when the moment came, they would not see it coming. I opened my eyes and made a silent vow to myself. This house, this life, my dignity, and my son's peace would not be taken from me again. The breaking point had been reached. The path forward was clear. And in the quiet of that night, with only the wind and the distant hum of the streetlights as witnesses, I smiled with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. They had made one fatal mistake. They had believed I would remain a victim. They were about to discover how dangerous it could be to underestimate me. I did not rush. That was the first rule I gave myself. Rushing was how mistakes were made, and mistakes were how people like him stayed in control. I became quiet, observant, invisible in the ways that mattered. I listened more than I spoke. I watched how he moved through the house, how he checked his phone when he thought no one was looking, how the neighbor's name appeared on his screen far more often than coincidence would allow. Every detail felt like a thread, and I was slowly weaving them into something unbreakable. I started with small things. I kept my phone close, recording conversations when his voice shifted into that low, poisonous tone he used only with me. I photographed documents he left carelessly on the counter. Bank statements, messages half deleted. Notes scribbled in margins that did not make sense until I read them twice. My hands no longer shook while I did this. They were steady, precise. Fear had been replaced by focus, and focus was far more powerful. At night, when the house was quiet, I reviewed everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, the glow of my phone lighting up the room, my heart pounding, not with panic, but with anticipation. The truth was forming piece by piece. Their carelessness was breathtaking. People who believe they are untouchable always grow sloppy. They confuse silence with weakness. They confuse patience with surrender. The neighbor became easier to read once I stopped seeing her as a mystery and started seeing her as a pattern. She lingered near the fence when he was outside. She called when I was not home. She laughed too loudly at jokes that were not funny. One afternoon, I saw her hand brush his arm as she passed him on the driveway, casual, practiced, intimate. My stomach tightened, but I did not react. I stored the moment away like a weapon I would use later. I began writing everything down: dates, times, expressions, words. I created a timeline so clear that even a stranger could understand the story unfolding. Betrayal was no longer emotional. It was factual, organized, undeniable, and facts were far more dangerous than anger. I reached out quietly to someone I trusted, a woman who had once gone through her own war of manipulation and lies. I did not give her details at first. I asked questions about evidence, about strategy, about what it took to expose someone without destroying yourself in the process. Her advice was simple and terrifying. When you strike, make sure it is clean. Make sure it is final. That sentence stayed with me. Clean, final. I waited for the right moment, and the right moment came disguised as arrogance. My husband planned a small gathering. Friends, neighbors, people whose opinions he cared about. He loved an audience. He loved control. That was his weakness. He needed to be admired. And I knew exactly how to use that. The day of the gathering, I moved through the house like a ghost. Calm, polite, unremarkable. He did not suspect anything because he never believed. I was capable of anything. That belief was my shield. My phone was fully charged. My documents were organized. My evidence was ready. All I had to do was wait for the room to fill. As people arrived, laughter echoed through the living room. Glasses clinked. Music played softly in the background. The neighbor stood close to him, too close, her eyes flicking toward me with that familiar smirk. It did not shake me this time. It strengthened me. When he made his first joke at my expense, the room laughed politely. When he made the second, I saw a few uncomfortable glances. When he made the third, I stood up. The silence was immediate. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. I thanked everyone for coming. I said there was something important I needed to share, something that had been misunderstood for far too long. He tried to interrupt me. I raised my hand. The audacity of it stunned him into stillness. I connected my phone to the television. The first recording played. His voice. His insults. Clear, sharp, undeniable. A ripple moved through the room. The second recording followed. Then the messages. Then the photos. Then the timeline. Each piece fell into place like a controlled explosion. The neighbor's face drained of color. My husband stammered, his confidence collapsing in real time. He tried to laugh. No one laughed with him. He tried to explain. His words tangled and failed. The room had shifted, and he could feel it slipping away from him. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult him. I did not beg for understanding. I let the truth speak. And truth, when delivered without emotion, is terrifying. Someone asked how long it had been happening. I answered calmly. Someone asked why I stayed silent. I said I was not silent. I was preparing. The neighbor tried to leave. I asked her to stay. My voice was gentle. The room turned toward her. The evidence tied her in just as cleanly. The messages, the timing, the patterns. There was no escape that did not look like guilt. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. I felt something inside me release, a tension I had carried for months melting away. This was not chaos. This was control reclaimed. Every insult they had thrown at me, every moment they believed I was powerless, had built toward this. I looked at my husband and realized something quietly devastating. He was small. Not physically. Spiritually, his power had always depended on my silence. Without it, he had nothing. I gathered my things that night with dignity. No shouting, no tears, only clarity. People offered apologies, support, understanding. I accepted none of it with bitterness and none of it with relief. This was not about their approval. It never had been. As I walked out, I did not look back. I did not need to. Justice did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived in a room full of witnesses, with truth laid bare and arrogance stripped away. And sometimes the most powerful revenge was not destruction, but exposure. They had built their world on my suffering. I had just dismantled it with their own lies. The room went still. Silence fell heavier than any accusation, heavier than any insult I had endured in the months of torment. My husband's face had turned pale. The smugness he carried like armor dissolved into something fragile, something human. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Only the jitter of his hands, the quick dart of his eyes betrayed the panic that he could not yet articulate. I let the pause stretch, let every second drag, so that the humiliation could settle into him fully. Every breath he took sounded loud in the quiet room. Every shuffle of feet, every nervous glance toward the neighbor became a part of the rhythm of his unraveling. I did not speak. I let the evidence speak. My recordings, my documents, the messages meticulously organized, they did all the work for me. The neighbor's face was drained of color. She shifted, leaned back, tried to make excuses that died before they left her lips. The smile I had once feared now seemed absurdly forced, ridiculous. I realized I was standing taller than I had in months. My spine straight, my chin lifted, my presence commanding the room in a way that even they could not ignore. I felt my chest rise with relief, my lungs filling with air that had been held for far too long. Every insult, every smirk, every cruel word they had directed at me had been inverted. The weight of months of humiliation lifted, as if a stone had been removed from my back. I felt the first true sense of validation I had known in years. I was not powerless, I was not small. I was in control. My husband's voice finally broke through the silence, trembling. "This is impossible," he stammered. He looked at everyone in the room, seeking allies' reassurance, some thread of support. There was none. The people who had once watched me falter now watched him falter instead. Their faces were mirrors of my relief, my triumph, my long-awaited justice. I took a slow step forward, letting the movement carry authority without aggression. My son's eyes met mine from across the room. His small nod was all I needed, a quiet affirmation that we were both witnessing the collapse of the narrative that had tried to crush us. I swallowed and allowed a small, steady smile to appear, one that carried every ounce of the fire I had stored. Every moment of careful planning, every second of observation and patience. The recordings continued to play, unspooling the truth of their collusion, their arrogance, their carelessness. The neighbor tried to speak again, a sharp defensive edge in her tone. I tilted my head slightly. "It is too late," I said softly, every word deliberate, heavy with calm authority. The room held its breath. She faltered under the weight of the truth. I could see the realization sink in the mask of control she had relied upon for weeks was gone, shattered. My husband tried to regain composure. He laughed nervously, a hollow, strangled sound that carried none of the confidence it once had. I did not interrupt. I did not argue. I let the humiliation unfold naturally, like a storm arriving exactly on time. The crackle of tension in the room was almost electric, each second a drumbeat in the symphony of his undoing. I could feel my own body relax in tiny increments, the pressure I had carried like a clenched fist finally releasing. My shoulders eased. My hands unclenched. My pulse slowed, replaced by a steady rhythm of satisfaction. Every look he cast in my direction now carried the knowledge that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. I did not need to shout. I did not need to attack. Observation, patience, and truth had done it for me. My son edged closer, standing at my side. I felt a surge of protective pride, knowing that he had witnessed not just the unraveling of cruelty, but the reclaiming of dignity. I bent slightly and whispered that it was over, and his eyes lit with a mixture of awe and relief. I realized then that the payoff was not only for me, it was for him, for every small moment he had seen and suffered alongside me. The neighbor stumbled toward the door, face twisted with fury and shame. My voice cut softly but firmly. "Do not leave yet," I said, every word precise, intentional. She froze, realizing that she was entangled in her own complicity, just as my husband was. Every step they had taken, every whisper they had shared, had become evidence. And the room itself had become a courtroom where their guilt was undeniable. I turned back to my husband, who was now visibly shaking. His arrogance, his cruelty, his sense of superiority all had crumbled like dry sand in my hands. I felt a strange, exquisite satisfaction as I watched him stumble through attempts at excuses that had no place in this room of witnesses. He had underestimated me, and that mistake had cost him everything he thought he controlled. Finally, I stepped back, breathing slowly, letting the tension fade while leaving the consequences fully in place. I did not gloat. I did not insult. I simply observed as the magnitude of his humiliation settled into the space. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the television, the distant traffic outside, and the quiet realization on every face that the balance had shifted permanently. I felt my heart lighten. Relief washed over me like a warm tide, carrying away months of stress, fear, and dread. Triumph wrapped around me fully, not as arrogance, but as validation. I had endured, I had observed, I had planned, and now I had executed flawlessly. I glanced at my son again, and for the first time in months, we both smiled freely, without reservation, without fear. The storm had passed. Justice had been served. And in the quiet, I understood the depth of the lesson. Cruelty never goes unchallenged, and patience, when paired with strategy, can be devastatingly powerful. I walked out of that house for the last time with a sense of calm I had not felt in years. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and the lingering warmth of the streetlights. Every step I took felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of months of humiliation, fear, and frustration had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I glanced at my son, holding his hand tightly. And I realized that what we had endured together had forged something stronger than I could have imagined: resilience. In the weeks that followed, I replayed the events in my mind, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Karma, I realized, was not always about divine intervention or random justice. Sometimes it was about patience, observation, and timing. It was about letting the truth reveal itself, letting arrogance expose its own weakness, and letting those who thought they held power show how fragile that illusion really was. I had not acted out of cruelty, nor had I sought vengeance for the sake of revenge alone. I had acted to reclaim my dignity, to restore balance, and to ensure that injustice did not go unchallenged. I reflected on the lessons that this experience had carved into my life. First, that endurance alone is not weakness. Silence can be strategic, and observation can be a weapon. I had learned that anger, when focused and controlled, is not destructive, it is clarifying. It shows you where your boundaries are, what you value, and how far you are willing to go to protect both yourself and those you love. My patience had allowed me to see patterns, to anticipate moves, to prepare. In that preparation, I discovered my own strength. I also reflected on the cost of underestimation. People like my husband thrive on the belief that others will remain compliant, that humility is synonymous with submission. That belief is a trap, and anyone who has ever been dismissed or undervalued knows the sting of it. But I learned that being underestimated is also an opportunity. It allows you to plan, to gather resources, and to move with precision when others are blind to your potential. Underestimation can be turned into power, and power can be subtle, invisible until the moment it strikes. The experience with the neighbor taught me a different kind of lesson. Not everyone who smiles politely is innocent. Some smiles hide intentions, complicity, and opportunism. But that awareness, once recognized, becomes a tool. Observation and discernment are just as important as strategy. Knowing who is truly an ally, who is truly a threat, and who is simply a bystander allows you to act decisively when the moment comes. The neighbor's smirk, once terrifying, now seemed almost trivial. It was a sign, not of power, but of vulnerability. As I moved forward, I thought about what it meant to begin again. I realized that true freedom comes not from revenge alone, but from reclaiming your sense of self. From standing upright, looking the world in the eye, and knowing that you will no longer tolerate disrespect or cruelty. I began to envision a life where my son and I could thrive without fear of manipulation, without the constant shadow of control hanging over us. I began to imagine mornings filled with laughter rather than anxiety, evenings of warmth instead of tension, and a home built not only on effort, but on respect, dignity, and understanding. There was also a strange sense of release in forgiveness, of the cruelty itself, but of the need to carry it indefinitely. I did not forgive them because they deserved it. I forgave them silently because I refused to remain tethered to their mistakes. Forgiveness in this context was a tool, not an obligation. It was the ability to reclaim my energy, to refocus on the life ahead, to step into the future without being dragged by the weight of the past. I thought often about my son during these reflections. The experience had taught him resilience as well, though in a quieter, more subtle way. He had witnessed injustice and cruelty firsthand, but he had also witnessed courage, strategy, and triumph. I realized that this would shape him, not into bitterness, but into someone who understands that patience, observation, and integrity are far more powerful than immediate reactions. That is the legacy I wanted to leave. Not just justice served, but lessons lived. Most importantly, I realized that beginnings are not always about dramatic changes or outward victories. Sometimes they are quiet. A cup of tea in the morning, a book read together, a moment of shared laughter, a walk through a street bathed in sunset. Every ordinary moment became a reminder of the life I had fought to reclaim. Every ordinary moment was a victory, subtle but profound. I no longer live in fear of arrogance, manipulation, or cruelty. I no longer measure myself by the judgment of those who believed they could diminish me. I have reclaimed my dignity, my confidence, and my voice. I have learned that justice is not always loud, but when it lands, it resonates with a power that cannot be ignored. And I have learned that resilience is cultivated not in comfort, but in the fire of trials faced and survived. As I stand now watching my son play in the garden, sunlight illuminating his face, I understand something crucial. Every ending is also a beginning. Every moment of triumph, every small act of patience, every strategic decision is a step toward the life you deserve. Karma does not always arrive on time, but preparation, clarity, and courage ensure that when it does, it arrives with certainty. And I am ready for whatever comes next. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of justice and resilience. Share in the comments your own experiences of overcoming betrayal or reclaiming your power, because every story of strength deserves to be heard. Remember, patience, clarity, and courage can turn even the darkest moments into victories.